All right, so I have recently been writing a paper with the eminent Dr. Taryn Hess, who is on the call with me now. So welcome. Great to be working with you on all of this. So in the paper, we were talking about the combination of culture and change in the light of data literacy and the age of generative AI, and how data literacy forms an important part of the overall success factors for implementing AI. But data literacy is not a thing that stands alone. Obviously, we have to think about adoption, culture, change, people, and all of these kinds of things. And you have developed a model that not only outlines what is successful in terms of culture and change, but also how organizations can be implementing change successfully. So let's start off with, we've outlined this in the paper, of course, but let's start off with, why is this important?
And thank you. I'm excited to be here, obviously, working with you on our paper and being able to share this out with the world at this point. So this whole culture change framework came out of the need for us to focus on people, right? So it's so easy to think about the tech side of things and to get your processes in place. People are that hard part of the equation. So when you boil it down and you think about, well, what does that mean? Like, how do I get people bought into this? And then you think about culture, it feels so nebulous. It feels squishy and gray and hard to wrap your hands around. So this framework was born out of that idea. It was born out of working with clients, seeing this real and live and talking with people and being in this space for some time. So the framework takes that squishiness out of the people side of things. It doesn't make it easy per se, right? People stuff is hard, but it gives a framework or a roadmap, so to speak, on the things that we need to tackle in order to make this real. When we break that down, we have to think about growing people. We have to think about aligning people, getting them on the same page, and we have to support people. So when you take that down a bit further and you think about this in light of data, and you think about it also with AI, obviously AI and data are married together forever. They cannot separate from each other. You have to look at building a language formally, like first and foremost, and that's part of that grow piece. So in order to get people to speak the same language, you have to define what are the same words that we need to use and come to a consensus on them. And then you have to share that with everybody. You have to talk about it. You can't just define these things and leave them in your data catalog. Because again, that's where that people piece comes into play, right? You've got to get this out to everybody. So you're shaking your head. So obviously this resonates, right? So you've probably been, worked with other people on this. So it's easy to find these words, but then you've got to get it out to people.
I think some of my reflections on that are that I remember, when was it? It was probably easily 10 years ago. And I was sitting in one of these sort of reasonably generic training rooms with a reasonably generic training course. And I can't remember exactly what the course was, but it was something that typically managers go on, maybe influencing or negotiating or some kind of soft skills training. And it's kind of a shame that I don't remember what the topic was, but it was around people. And the guy was outlining this kind of model. And he said, when you're talking to other people, then you are standing on top of a hill. And that hill is made up of your value set and your attitudes and all experiences that you've had and the country that you come from, the language that you use, and your family, what their views are, and the friends that you keep, and the things that you've done at work, and all of these things basically form this hill. And you stand on top of this hill, and the other person that you're talking with, they're standing on top of their hill, and they're talking about all of the things they're talking about from a perspective built on their values and attitudes and all of these other things. And that means that interpersonal conversations tend to be slightly difficult because whoever we're talking with, there is a distance. And if you have a lot of shared values and shared culture and all of these things, then the distance is not that great. So you can understand each other. You don't really have to bridge the chasm with discourse. And if you're far away from each other, there's a big gap that you've got to address. And I found that really interesting and memorable. We talk about learning experiences, and this was something that I found memorable. Even 10, 12 years later, I'm still thinking about that model. But the reason it's important in what you've just said is that organizational culture is built of lots of these little hills, and people do have some shared values and some shared culture, but they also have very disparate beliefs about data, technology, change, the fear that change brings, or whether they embrace that change. And all of these things are so important. And this is what you were alluding to around, people en masse are squishy because people as individuals, of course, the determinants of behavior are usually multivariate. But people, when we think about them as a group, can be difficult to manage, to herd in a particular direction, and all of these things. So that squishiness, does it make it interesting, or does it make it more difficult, or what do you think?
Man, it does all of that, right? So it makes it more interesting. It makes it more difficult. And then when you throw AI on top of it, as you were just describing around the fear, the unknown, it even not just the unknown, but different perspectives, it exacerbates what's happening here with this chasm that you could potentially have. So getting people closer and being able to talk and being able to have conversations, because that's ultimately what we're trying to do, is you get them closer as you're describing, which I think is a great visual, right, of what we're talking about here when it comes to culture and language, to get them closer, that core, just ontologies, taxonomies, basic stuff. We can get them on the same page about them. They can have those conversations, and it continues to bring them closer and closer. They can stay in their areas, right? Like they're going to have perspectives and different things, different goals, different needs. That's okay, as long as fundamentally that foundation, that base of their mountain is, built on the same bedrock. Then they can work together. They can have different bridges and different things that they can work together on.
Yeah, and you can then navigate the gap with discourse that shares a common language, right? So if everyone's talking the same language, then to some degree misunderstandings are, slightly different. So when we think about the key elements of cultural transformation or change management, because cultural transformation and change management, it's not so much my field, but I've heard both of these terms and I've worked with both of these terms alongside things like business change and various other terminologies that basically mean the same thing. But what are the key elements of the model that you've developed, and what are the key success factors? So the things to really get right if you want to even have a chance. We can't guarantee change management, but we can kind of, give it a fighting chance, right? But what are the key things?
I love that. Yeah, absolutely. Completely agree. We have to foster this, right? You cannot just say, okay, you go do these things and you walk away, right? That's why there's all of these layers to this framework. Is in order for this to be successful, this is a long-term investment in your people. And to do that, you have to think about all of these different pieces. So the different things that I would say you have to do to make this successful. Yes, long term, you got to change your mindset. We can't just flip the switch, right? Like we can't just go buy tech and think it's going to work. Right? With people, you have to continually encourage them. And how you start with that is by understanding their fears. You need to communicate with them, right? You need to get and not just understand their fears, be able to show them the value that this is going to bring for them. And you need to do it on not just from a company standpoint, because that's great, right? Like we all want our company to do well. And for a lot of us, some money in our pocket if the stocks do well, right? Like maybe you have some incentives there. But fundamentally, what does it mean for me in my role? I want to know, how is this going to benefit me? Because change is scary. Change also means that I have to do new things. Right? I have to upskill and learn this new tool or new process. And what was wrong with the old one if it wasn't broken? Right? So you have to understand fundamentally, what does it mean for that person? What is the impact on that person? And then communicate with them. Before you can even do that, though, you have to understand your vision. Like, why are you doing this to begin with? What is this going to mean for your company? And you have to build a strategy around that. And part of that strategy, yes, needs to include tech. It needs to include process, but you have to think about, how am I going to communicate and support my people in getting the skills that they need? So before I even talk to them, right, like I need to understand, what are the skills I need to accomplish this thing that I'm trying to do, my vision. So mapping out my goals, my strategy, building out those skills that I need my people to have, doing an analysis of